Apparently live. We are live. We're live. Hey, everybody. It's Dr. Ashley, pediatric emergency mom. Sitting here this afternoon with a very special guest. Very special guest. My husband, Jack Koban, Dr. Jack Koban. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your background, sir?
Sure. So I am a professional geologist, professional engineer. Have a background in environmental consulting, infrastructure work, energy work, a lot of different areas of the engineering sphere. I also work with the American Society of Civil Engineers and other organizations that do a lot of different advocacy projects and things. So one of the big things that ASCE, American Society of Civil Engineers, does is every few years we put out an infrastructure report card. Each state's ASCE organizations do one for their state, and then there's also one that is done for the entire country. And so one of the things, of course, in infrastructure is drinking water. So that's something that obviously is on the topic today. So Ashley asked me to jump in here and give a few words. So.
Yeah. So we've been talking about fluoride in drinking water based on the New York Times article in December, and then the study that was published in JAMA, and then the subsequent article in the New York Times that was published. And so that led to some interesting guests. So I had a pediatrician guest, and then I'm going to be talking to Dr. Karen Strickland, who's a dentist. And then as Dr. Karen Fody and I were talking, I thought, I should have Jack on to talk about drinking water. And so people could think about like where your water comes from and is it safe to drink? And also I'm going to let him jump in. So we're home, obviously, and we have 2 blue tick coonhounds, and they are the sweetest dogs in the world, but holy moly, they are the loudest dogs in the world. So this is our female barking at the back door. It's going to be a noisy live, and I apologize. I'm just going to let them in.
Yeah, so I guess it's my show now. I guess so. On drinking water, one of the things that Ashley had asked me to kind of touch on here is wherever you live in the country, you should be able to get clean, reliable drinking water. That's one of the things that we do from the engineering side of things to make sure we have the infrastructure that can produce and deliver that water to individual consumers. But if you're in a state or a big city like Baton Rouge or Memphis, where we've lived in the past, you can go online. You can get your water quality report that each water system puts out every so often. It's usually every year, every other year. The most recent one that I found for the city of Memphis was in 2023. You can go to Memphis Light Gas and Water, so mlgw.com, and you can look up that report. So I actually printed it out here. It goes through all the different things here. It tells you about the source of your water. In Memphis's case, we get all of they get all their drinking water from the Memphis Aquifer, which is a groundwater source. So it's a sand unit that is under hundreds of feet of sediment, contained on top and bottom by an impenetrable or more or less impenetrable clay layer. So it makes it a very clean, pure source. So it's a good water source to begin with. And of course they do some purification to make sure that they remove any kind of undesirable chemicals that may be in it, sulfur, things that can give it bad smells, or iron that could cause you to have rust or other scaling in your pipes. And then they of course add fluoride and do some chlorination just to make sure the water is pure for consumption. If you're living in Baton Rouge, you can go to brwater.com and get a similar report that they put out every 2 years, I think. So the one I have here, I believe, is from 2023 as well. But again, it gives you same thing, tells you where your source water is from. What are the chemicals of concern that may be dissolved in the water. Some of it's naturally, all of it's naturally occurring, but it also helps them to identify anything that may be going in there that's compromising their water quality. So they do these reports anywhere they're pumping water from the ground or any other source. There's constant monitoring of this, and so that way, if something does go bad, they know to not pump from those wells or go in and do some kind of checks to make sure that it's safe. Obviously, Flint, Michigan made big headlines a few years ago, right about the time we were putting out our last infrastructure report card for the state of Louisiana. Also, there was a town in Louisiana, I'm drawing a blank now, I think it was St. Joseph's, that had similar issues to Flint. And some of it was because of poor water quality that was creating problems with their aging infrastructure, causing it to leach out some of these undesirable chemicals into the water, and causing them to have to go in and bring in supplemental water to the community there. So that's something that we always want to look at. But I'll hand it back over to Ashley. We're getting into fluoride, and I don't want to get off topic too much.
Well, I just have questions too. So, I mean, obviously, I know a lot about drinking water and tap water because this is something we've talked about. But for someone like maybe you just moved into an area, or you just relocated, how do you know where your water comes from?
So that's one thing that they talk about in these drinking water quality reports. Like I mentioned, so Memphis, they get their water from the ground, as does Baton Rouge. Baton Rouge's comes from the Southern Hills Aquifer. So this is a groundwater source that's largely the same geologic units, but they have different names for different regions. Some states or some cities like New Orleans, though, they get their water from the Mississippi River. So there's a much different purification process there. They have to go through a lot of different things to take out turbidity, which is like basically the muddiness of the cloudiness of the water. They have to take out some other kinds of chemicals and that may be dissolved in the water, any kind of runoff that's coming from different agricultural sources like nitrates. You might be getting other sources from just stormwater drainage that goes into some of these surface water sources. So really, groundwater is probably, groundwater is a very good source. It's it's obviously very nice. People like to market it as artesian, even though artesian has nothing to do with water.
Don't get him started. Don't get him started on that.
But yeah, no, it is good to know where your water comes from. And like I said, with every public water system, you can go online and find out what your water source is, they should have these things published because it's something they're required to do.
So, so we've talked a lot about fluoride. And so we know how much is like the U.S. kind of legal limits, safe limits, and how much is in the water for Baton Rouge and New Orleans. How often, and you may have said this when I was dealing with the dogs, sorry about that, but how often are cities checking to make sure everything is the way it's supposed to be?
I can't speak for every water system, but having worked in a water purification working for a water purification system for a power plant in my previous career, I assume it's very similar. We had to go in and sample for certain chemicals on a daily basis, every morning and every evening. It was basically a 12-hour cycle that we had to test these things for. A lot of it was for iron to make sure that we're not fouling any of the equipment. But really, most importantly for a power plant is, or at least the power plant I was at, was making sure that you have no silica in your water. And silica is very bad because when you're superheating this water into this superheated steam, anything that is above even like just a tiny amount can precipitate out and create damage. And so like basically if you're precipitating out silica, you're precipitating out little bits of sand, which going through the turbine could actually destroy the turbine. So that was always kind of like, make sure that silica is below your limit all the time. But I assume that they probably take daily or weekly, if not daily, all these wells. I know that when I was with the Water Institute of the University of Memphis during grad school, we did a lot of work with MLGW. And so we periodically sampled wells for them to check for quality. It's actually kind of the basis of my thesis when I was there, was like looking at, they had one well where they were getting like these, anomalously high, or what they thought were anomalously high chemical parameters. Like some of it was like, it wasn't anything like toxic, but it was like things you would expect to see from like surface water, like they were getting some nitrates and things that wouldn't normally be found in the aquifer. Well, they found that there was an area where this well was drawing down water to the point that was creating like a downward gradient, and there was some water coming through like thin spots in the confining unit, the clay layer on top of the sand. So that's something that like they test for regularly, because they want to make sure that they're not pumping out bad water, and they don't want to be pumping out water even if it's not toxic. They don't want to be pumping out water that has like an overabundance of calcium or something like that that's going to create scaling and mess up their infrastructure, not to mention people's homes.
That's really good to know, because I obviously have no idea. I thought it was like once a month. So
now,
that's-
like I said, I'm making some assumptions there. I can't speak for all water systems, but based on how how my experience has been, I would assume it's much more frequent.
So if you live in a municipality, you live in a city, and the city has a water report, is there, for people like me who have no idea, is there just like a box that's like, this water's good to drink, or maybe don't drink this water? Or is there, in layman's terms, is it
definitely like, I mean, if you see something in your water that is unusual, like unusual smell, taste, color, something like that, it might be worth your while to just like contact your water system and say, hey, I'm experiencing this. And they may be able to tell you, hey, this is normal. Like in Baton Rouge, for example, there is a certain amount of naturally occurring sulfur that is in the groundwater that's dissolved in there. And so that's one of the reasons they use chlorine to clean the water. So it helps take some of that smell out and like make sure it's clean. But if you have water that sits in a pipe, like for example, if you have like a faucet that you almost never use in like a guest house or something, and then you go out there once, every month and you turn it on, and it smells a little funny, that could be part of that reason, because some of that chlorine will eventually, like over time, will dissipate and some of that sulfur may still remain, and then you'll get that smell if it concentrates a little bit. But it's not bad for you. But also, like, you might sometimes get some brown water in pipes, because you'll get where water's not flowing constantly, you'll get a little bit of that sediment that kind of settles out. Like manganese is another like naturally occurring mineral that you can see in your water. It's in very small amounts, but if you let it sit for long enough time, when you turn that water and do that first flush, you might get something out of it. So that's one of the reasons why when I did environmental consulting and we were testing for lead in drinking water in people's homes and things like that, you would always do a flush before you took the sample, just in case there was something in there that wasn't, it might give you like an erroneously high number or something because it had been sitting for a while. It might have come from like the pipes itself, not from the actual water source. So I guess if you have some kind of funny looking water, you may want to just flush it. But if it's something that's persistent, then that's something I might want to like go and ask them.
So if you are, how to ask this question? So if you're in an area where like maybe it's not the best drinking water, like I know Baton Rouge has good drinking water just straight out the tap. Memphis had great drinking water straight out the tap. But if you're in an area where maybe the drinking water isn't the best, how are the Brita or the different filters, like, are those sufficient, or for the most part, or I guess it depends on where it is and how bad the water is.
I think in the United States, especially in like bigger cities, you're probably good anywhere. Some rural areas, like I know there are rural parts of Louisiana where they have issues with, power outages or a lack of redundancy to keep their systems working all the time. And so they'll have boil water notices. In fact, they had there was a water boil advisory in New Orleans. I want to say it was like sometime around October last year, because of a balloon that had floated into a power line.
I remember that. Yeah.
Knocked out power and it shut down their water treatment plant. And so they had to go in there and like do like a whole round of testing to make sure that they, all the water was clean. They had to do like kind of a flush of the pipes. So that's, you always be aware of those. If someone gives a water boil advisory, take their word up on that. Chances are it's probably not going to hurt you. But listen to public health officials. They know what they're talking about.
Or my mother.
Right. Yeah. Ashley's mom is she gives water boil advisories all the time for central Louisiana, the rural areas.
If you live in central Louisiana, if you live in a Bullis Parish and you have any questions about the water, just ask Anita. She knows. But I think so. Dr. Karen Fody brought up a really interesting point. So we're talking about fluoride and the importance for kids' teeth when it's within normal limits, right? If it's over a certain amount, then it becomes a concern. And a lot of people that just don't know about the quality of water will buy bottled water, which I didn't even think about bottled water not being fluorinated, and then being an issue for kids' teeth, but also just the huge environmental impact with all of that plastic. God, I gave them rawhides and they're outside and they're still going. And so, as far as like, or to your knowledge, like bottled water versus just using like a Brita filter for your tap water. Any thoughts on that?
Oh, I'm sorry. Are you talking to me? Thought you were talking to someone else here. Oh yeah. So I don't know. I really can't say too much about fluoride. I mean, from a health benefit standpoint, I'm not that kind of a doctor. I will say though that fluoride is something that's been done since like the mid 1900s in water in the United States. I
1965. I looked it up.
Yeah. So yeah, mid 1900s, so 1965. But it has been shown to help people with better dental hygiene, dental health. It creates a lot fewer cavities by having fluoride in water. I mean, that's something that has been proven. I mean, there's so much data behind it to show that that's true. But they in at least in Tennessee, I don't know about Louisiana, but I did find it in this MLGW report here. It says
that's Memphis Lake Gas and Water.
Yeah, so fluoridation has been successfully practiced since the mid-1900s. MLGW began adding fluoride to the water according to mandates set by a City of Memphis ordinance at 1 part per million. In December 2010, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services proposed that through the CDC that fluoride level recommended for drinking water should be set at 0.7 milligrams per liter, which is the same thing as ppm. But so anyway, and through that, they've reduced that down to by just a small amount. But and they currently run at about 0.6 parts per million. So it's they've come down a little bit on it, but the healthy or the recommended level or like to not exceed is 4 parts per million, like a whole lot higher. So
Yeah.
unless you're getting it at a much higher level than what is in most public water systems, there's like zero known health problems from it, and all these questions about it like lowering people's IQ. I mean,
so all of
this is just more conspiracy.
Well, so the studies that were done where, and I talked about it on my live where I broke down the articles in the study. It's not a ton of robust data, and none of it was done in the United States, which is also problematic. But it did say for the correlation that they did find their inverse, right? The higher fluoridation, fluorine would be really bad. We would all be dead. Sorry. For the higher fluoride levels, lower IQ, and lower IQ by like 1 point. I think it was like 1.13. But that was found in levels 2 or higher. So 2 parts per million or 2 milligrams per liter. And so you're saying like Memphis started at 1 milligram per liter, which those studies showed that if it was 1.5 or lower, there was no link to lower IQ. So Memphis had already started at 1, and then now they're down to 0.6, 0.7. So still well below the.
Yeah, and I don't really know what the reasoning behind lowering it was, other than like, I guess there was probably some people out there making a lot of noise about how it's bad for you. And so they said, well, fine, we'll bring it down a little bit to make you happy. But I can't say for that.
From what from my extensive Google search in researching these papers, from what I can maybe find was having it at 0.7 allows for a little wiggle room if there's any groundwater contamination or organic contamination from like rocks or soil or whatever ways that fluoride may also get into the drinking water. So just to give some wiggle room, but it's a lot of wiggle room to the 1 point, like from the 0.7 to the 1.5. So
Baton Rouge here, according to this report, says they the highest level they detected in their drink in any of their systems they tested was 0.8 parts per million. So
it's still well below.
Yeah, it's pretty much on par with what Tennessee has. And it says that their lowest range was non-detectable. So there was no violations of any health codes there.
And so so what about municipal or city water is one way people get their water. Private.
Well, I mean that's something you're kind of on your own with. I mean, if you have a private well, there's no one really to talk to. You have to do your own sampling and testing, I guess, or you can hire someone to come out and test it. I think most states have like a state university. I think LSU will do testing. I know they'll at least do testing for like soil concentrations of different chemicals if you're trying to find out what your healthier your flower beds are. I think they do the same though for well water. You can take a sample to them, and I'm not entirely sure where that would be, but I want to say it's a free service. But that don't quote me on that. You may want to look into it, but I think it is. But you should be able to go there and like at least get like pH and basic chemicals tested. And you can always test your own pH. Like you can order, pH strips or anything like that. Do home tests. You can probably test for other chemicals at home as well without too much effort. It's probably drop in there and see what color the paper turns. I think that for well water though, those typically you get a lot more of like the sediment in your pipes. You get a lot more of like the sulfur smell. Like I know a lot of people who live like on well water out in the country that say that like their water smells like eggs, and that's because of the sulfur concentration that's just naturally occurring, and it doesn't take much for it to smell funky. But I guess some people just get over it, get used to it.
And so, other than like the city water, private well water, are there other ways that people get water?
I mean, yeah, like you can have a lot of, well, I guess for like green architecture, a lot of places will collect rainwater, but usually that's for just like toilet flushing and irrigation, things like that. They won't typically use that for drinking. But it's one way to kind of, I guess, reduce the strain or the amount of water you have to pump out of a well to use. I guess in a place where you get consistent rain, I guess it's also a good way to be more environmentally sustainable. But if you end up with very, long drought situations and you're in trouble, like we had in Louisiana a few years ago, we had a drought of about 5 months, which is pretty unusual for Louisiana, but that's part of the whole climate situations, but that's a whole nother discussion.
So we can, in the comments, I think I'll get him to send me the links and then it can post them in the comments if people want to see at least those reports.
And then I would say too, if you, regardless of where you live, if you type in, like say you live in New York City, like type in New York City water quality report, and there should be some water utility system or water provider that should be able to give you that. And also I would say if you are interested in your infrastructure, because there are some things with infrastructure that, although our reports are strictly looking at the actual physical infrastructure that is helping to deliver that water, it's not looking at quality. But there are some things with older infrastructure that can lead to lower quality. So if you have well, for example, every year they put out a drinking water infrastructure needs survey and assessment. The most recent one, it says that we have in the U.S. about $50 billion worth of infrastructure needs, which luckily for us, we had actually, I take that back. I'm sorry. 50 billion is how much money was allocated to drinking water and wastewater by the bipartisan infrastructure law, which was a monumental law for infrastructure, despite the fact that Kristi Noem said that she was shocked that it all went to housing and pipes. It's apolitical, but I'm just saying still, pipes are infrastructure. I wrote the report on it, so I hope it's infrastructure. But anyway, the point is though, there's $50 billion allocated to drinking water and wastewater, but we have about a $625 billion gap that needs to be addressed in the nation. Louisiana has a pretty huge gap of their own, and so we're working to get that done. But if you have older systems, really old systems with like lead in the drinking water lines, which is something that was very common way back when, and I mean really not even that far back really. But if you have lead drinking water pipes or lead containing pipes, and you have high salinity, or you have unbalanced pH in your water, it can create a leaching condition that will take some of that water that normally would be basically like inert in the pipes, or maybe not inert, but it would be locked into those pipes. It can be leached out and brought into drinking water. That's problematic. No amount of lead is good for people to be consuming. So something we want to make sure we would address there, and that's things that our infrastructure report card is trying to do, is advocate for funding to fix those things. And I know I have it written in my notes somewhere, but anyway, I can post it in the link too. But if you look on infrastructurereportcard.org, that is the American Society of Civil Engineers, infrastructure landing page, and it'll give you the national rankings of all of these items. And it will also give you links to each and every state and territory's infrastructure report card. So you can go and look it up. My name is on the one from 2017 for Louisiana. We're working on releasing the next one. It should be coming out in the next few months. We're trying to get it out before the next state legislative session comes out, because it's obviously very important for us to get it in front of legislators, because they're the ones who are putting these dollars towards fixing these things. So I definitely recommend looking into it if you have any questions. And then not to spin off too far, but if you have problems or questions about bridges, roads, rail, all that stuff, all those are categories in the infrastructure report card. So very good information, and it's just good stuff to know.
And just on a personal note, because this happened to us last year or 2 years ago, I can't remember. So we found out the hard way that we know we live in an old home, and found out that one of our pipes had worn thin, and we had galvanized steel pipes under the house, and found out that when those pipes break down, there is a potential for lead in the water. And so we were drinking tap water. We had to have all of those pipes replaced and had to have our lead levels checked, which was, thankfully everything turned out to be okay. But it was just like, I didn't know that was.
And to clarify, all of the pipes that were old and needed to be replaced were ones that were draining away from the house, not servicing the house. So that makes a big difference.
Yeah.
Another fun fact is they used to use terracotta, like clay pipes, for sewer pipes back in the day. So that was a fun surprise to find and have to replace.
That was a fun surprise. Stuff you don't know about old homes. Thank you, Jack. Thank you. It was very nice having you on the show today. I apologize for the incessant barking. They're so sweet, but it's ridiculous. Any other questions for Jack or about drinking water? Just drop them in the comments, and he'll be happy to answer any of your questions.
Sure.
All right. Y'all have a great evening. Bye.